I said when I came into this job, I would never plead for sympathy from people about this being the loneliest and toughest, and this wasn't a lonely period. But there was a certain burden, and it related to the responsibility for the lives of others.
And that was
the toughest, yeah, because you just don't need that.
when you see 17 and 18-year-olds.
Oh, God. But that goes with the territory. I mean, that you just have to accept that. But I must say,
in moments like that, do you pray more than ever before in your life? Hmm? It's a hell of a responsibility that you probably wouldn't wish on anyone else. But you handled it.
that was the tough part.
Let me just conclude by this quote. You said this to the Congress: "We're coming home now, proud, confident, heads high. There is much that we must do at home and abroad, and we will do it. We are Americans." You're the only superpower there is left.
That's right.
What do you do next?
Well, you conduct yourself without arrogance. You lead. You are considerate to the concerns of other countries, large and small.
To focus my comments better so I can communicate with people who don't know me very well. Yeah. And I need to always learn that you have so little time. There is so precious little time that you have to really be like a laser beam with your words and your actions. You got to really focus. You got to have that kind of mental discipline that sometimes still my workaholic tendencies don't permit me to have. I think that's one problem.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes I always think that everything can be worked out too. You know, sometimes you can't work everything out. You just got to cut it.
Yeah.
And you got to know when to cut it and when to work things out. And that's something I've done a lot of work on, trying to make sure I overcome that weakness.
Speaking of focusing and communicating, I know you've been through this a billion times, but can we get into the smoking the joint thing again?
That's why I played saxophone. You see, you have to blow into it, so you have to inhale with a saxophone or you die. That's how I learned to inhale, playing my saxophone. You blow out, and then you have to inhale. Now, hey, I tried.
One for Bill.
Hey, I tried to do it. I just couldn't. I wasn't trying to get off the hook, you know. I was just making a nervous remark.
Okay, let's go through, because I've heard different people discuss it, and I've done my jokes. Okay, you got the joint in your hand.
I bet you burned me.
You know what I'm saying? Okay, somebody says, you know, that word E-A-R, you all heard it in college, ear. And, somebody says, ear. And then what do you do at that point?
I took it, and I tried to smoke it just like a cigarette. But I'd never smoked a cigarette before.
And you're not a drinker either, right?
No, well, I never had a drink till I was 22. I do now a little bit, but not much. But anyway, so I did my best. I mean, I tried, but I just couldn't inhale it. I mean, I wasn't trying to get a good conduct medal for saying I didn't inhale. I was just nervously pointing out that it was another one of those things I tried to do and failed at in life. I gave it. I was 22 or 23 years old. I gave it my very best shot.
Yeah.
I mean, I really tried. I just flipped.
I know how it is dealing with the press. If you could explain it over again the first time, would you do it any differently?
Yeah, I'd have just said yes. But you know, but here's the deal. When a politician says something, if you're in politics, the cynicism about politicians is so great. People thought, well, this guy calculated this whole answer, and he calculated it so that he thought, well, maybe you won't burn me quite as bad if I say I didn't inhale. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard of. They asked me a question I didn't know they were going to ask, and I gave an honest answer. And that I didn't inhale was a nervous afterthought. I was sort of laughing about it after 22 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all that was going on. I just sort of laughing in my mind about it. But I got beat up about it because everybody thought I calculated this answer. You know, maybe I should be more calculating than I am. But, you know, if you folks are never going to get good politicians, really good public officials, If all you want is somebody that calculates every word they say, every deed they do, and their whole life becomes like a robot or an automaton, you know. I did something when I was younger. I told the truth about it, and I made a mess of telling about it because I guess I'm still kind of embarrassed about it after all these years.
Yeah.
But it is not a big deal, and it was made into a federal case. I got more publicity on that than my idea about how to send every kid in America to college who wants to go, which I think is more important to the election and to the future of this country.
I read that you are contemplating raising taxes possibly for people who make $200,000 or more.
You'll have to pay more if I
Yeah, I'm mad about that. Why don't you expound on that and talk a little bit about what you will do for the economy? That's part of the LA riots and some of the other
Absolutely
frustrations
it is.
all over this country.
Absolutely. A big part of California's problems. You lost 500,000 jobs in California in 2 years. Your state government's broke, $11 billion in debt. You're cutting back on education when you ought to be increasing investment in education to prepare all these kids for the future they need to live. So, what my theory is that we've got to increase our investment in this country. After World War II, we rebuilt Europe and Japan. After the Cold War, we've got this marvelous window of opportunity when we can rebuild America, and we better get after it. And we got to do it. The only way you ever rebuild a country is to invest in your people, in their jobs, their education, and their health care. So my idea is that first we ought to take every dollar we're cutting the defense budget by, every dollar, and invest it in building an economy for the 21st century. In California, what does that mean? Build high-speed rail networks. Don't buy the trains from Europe or Japan. Build them here. Build short-haul aircraft. Build modern waste recycling systems. Build a modern fiber optics network. Put millions of people to work building a rich country for tomorrow. Do it with the defense cuts. Second thing, we need some more money to invest in education. Every poor child in South Central LA should be in a Head Start program. The poor school districts, they ought to have elementary counselors in the schools to deal with those kids that bring problems to the front door. And small classes in the early grades. There ought to be a computer in every classroom in America. The kids that don't go to college ought to have 2 years of apprenticeship training so they can get good jobs, not dead-end jobs. That's what our competitors do. And we ought to loan everybody the money that wants to go to college, the money, and let them pay it back later. Now, all of this, believe it or not, in the context of this $1 trillion budget of ours is not a great deal. But since we have a deficit that's enormous and that needs to be brought down, I think we have to raise some more money. You can't raise money on the middle class because their taxes went up and their incomes went down in the 80s. People in upper income groups, their incomes went up and their taxes went down. Relax, your taxes will still be lower than they would have been in 1980 when I get done, but you'll have to pay a little more so we can send all these kids to college. It'll be the best money we ever spent. We'll have a stronger economy. All those people that you and your pastor have tried to help, if you could tell them when they're 11, 12 years old, look, if you stay straight, you may not make as much money as you would dealing drugs, but you're going to make enough money. You're going to have a good, decent life. You're going to feel good about yourself, and your country is going to make sure that you get the education and training you need. It would be great. And if you could say to them, if you go to college, you can pay the loan back. We'll pay your way to college, but we'll pay it back. You can, either as a percentage of your income when you go to work, or even better, let's make a Peace Corps here at home. Come back to LA and pay your college loan off by giving 2 years of your life as a counselor to kids in trouble, as a nurse in a public health clinic, as a police officer on the block, as a teacher. You think about it. A lot of these kids in trouble, they're never the most important person in the world to anybody except the people they're in the gangs with. So we got to give them a good gang to be a part of, and you got to have some personal connection. So anyway, you have to pay a little more, but not a lot more, and enough to invest in our people again. That's what we got to do.
If it helps our youth, I'm down with it. I'll be right back with Bill Clinton.
I believe that there is so much waste around here. And again, every time you get into, see, I'm the only guy that talks numbers. I love this. Nobody else will even talk about it. As I've said, it's like a crazy ant in the basement. Everybody knows she's there, but nobody talks about it. I'm talking about it. Then I can talk, with endless numbers about it. And then when I finish, typically the establishment press said, he didn't tell us enough. I'd just break up. Nobody else said anything, and I haven't said enough. Let me just talk in general terms today, since no matter how many numbers I give the press right now, it doesn't satisfy them. Number one, we cannot spend our children's money. We are looking on the edge of a revolution of young people who are starting to realize that we, our generation, have put them $4 trillion in debt, and they don't like it, and they shouldn't. Don't we love our children as much as our parents loved us? Sure we do. We cannot spend their money. Now then, that's the easy decision. The hard decision is, how do you fix it? You've got to have, instead of a deteriorating job base in the economy, which is what the last 12 years have given us, we've got to have, first, you've got to stop the decline, stabilize it, turn it into a growing job base, growing industrial base. The only way to do that is to make the finest products in the world. Now, that's something I know a lot about. We've got to put everybody that's breathing back to work in a good, solid job. Then you've got a growing tax base. But in the meantime, you've got to have a real Graham Rudman that stops the deficit spending, so you don't lose any more financial blood. Then with the growing tax base, you pay off the $4 trillion, and we leave the American dream.
Good evening, and welcome to the first of 3 debates among the major candidates for President of the United States, sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates. The candidates are Independent candidate Ross Perot, Governor Bill Clinton, the Democratic nominee, and President George Bush, the Republican nominee. I am Jim Lara of the MacNeil-Lara NewsHour on PBS, and I will be the moderator for this 90-minute event, which is taking place before an audience here in the athletic complex on the campus of Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. 3 journalists will be asking questions tonight. They are John Mashik of the Boston Globe, Ann Compton of ABC News, and Sandra Van Oker, a freelance journalist. We will follow a format agreed to by representatives of the Clinton and Bush campaigns. That agreement contains no restrictions on the content or subject matter of the questions. Each candidate will have up to 2 minutes for a closing statement. The order of those, as well as the questioning, was determined by a drawing. The first question goes to Mr. Perot. He will have 2 minutes to answer, to be followed by rebuttals of 1 minute each from Governor Clinton and then President Bush. Gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening, Jim.
The first topic tonight is what separates each of you from the other. Mr. Perot, what do you believe tonight is the single most important separating issue of this campaign?
I think the principal issue that separates me is that 5.5 million people came together on their own and put me on the ballot. I was not put on the ballot by either of the 2 parties. I was not put on the ballot by any PAC money, by any foreign lobbyist money, by any special interest money. This is a movement that came from the people. This is the way the framers of the Constitution intended our government to be, a government that comes from the people. Over time, we have developed a government that comes at the people, that comes from the top down, where the people are more or less treated as objects to be programmed during the campaign with commercials and media events and fear messages and personal attacks and things of that nature. The thing that separates my candidacy and makes it unique is that this came from millions of people in 50 states all over this country who wanted a candidate that worked and belonged to nobody but them. I go into this race as their servant, and I belong to them. So this comes from the people.
Governor Clinton, 1 minute response.
The most important distinction in this campaign is that I represent real hope for change, a departure from trickle-down economics, a departure from tax and spend economics to invest and grow. But before I can do that, I must challenge the American people to change, and they must decide. Tonight I say to the President, Mr. Bush, for 12 years you've had it your way, you've had your chance, and it didn't work. It's time to change. I want to bring that change to the American people, but we must all decide first we have the courage to change for hope and a better tomorrow.
President Bush, 1 minute response, sir.
Well, I think one thing that distinguishes is experience. I think we've dramatically changed the world. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but the changes are mind-boggling for world peace. Kids go to bed at night without the same fear of nuclear war. And change for change's sake isn't enough. We saw that message in the late 70s, and we heard a lot about change, and what happened, the misery index went right through the roof. But my economic program, I think, is the kind of change we want. And the way we're going to get it done is we're going to have a brand new Congress. A lot of them are thrown out because of all the scandals. I'll sit down with them, Democrats and Republicans alike, and work for my agenda for American renewal, which represents real change. But I'd say if you had to separate out, I think it's experience at this level.
Governor Clinton, how do you respond to the president on the question? You have 2 minutes on the question of experience. He says that is what distinguishes him from the other two of you.
I believe experience counts, but it's not everything. Values, judgment, and the record that I have amassed in my state also should count for something. I've worked hard to create good jobs and to educate people. My state now ranks first in the country in job growth this year, fourth in income growth, fourth in the reduction of poverty, third in overall economic performance, according to a major news magazine. That's because we believe in investing in education and in jobs. And we have to change in this country. You know, my wife Hillary gave me a book about a year ago in which the author defined insanity as just doing the same old thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We have got to have the courage to change. Experience is important, yes. I've gotten a lot of good experience in dealing with ordinary people over the last year, month. I've touched more people's lives and seen more heartbreak and hope, more pain and more promise than anybody else who's run for president this year. I think the American people deserve better than they're getting. We have gone from first to 13th in the world in wages in the last 12 years since Mr. Bush and Mr. Reagan have been in. Personal income has dropped while people have worked harder. In the last 4 years, there have been twice as many bankruptcies as new jobs created. We need a new approach. The same old experience is not relevant. We're living in a new world after the Cold War, and what works in this new world is not trickle down, not government for the benefit of the privileged few, not tax and spend, but a commitment to invest in American jobs and American education, controlling American health care costs, and bringing the American people together. That is what works. And you can have the right kind of experience and the wrong kind of experience. Mine is rooted in the real lives of real people, and it will bring real results if we have the courage to change.
President Bush, 1 minute to respond.
I just thought of another big difference here between me. I don't believe Mr. Perot feels this way, but I know Governor Clinton did because I want to accurately quote him. I think he said that the country is coming apart at the seams. Now, I know that the only way he can win is to make everybody believe the economy is worse than it is. But this country's not coming apart at the seams, for heaven's sakes. We're the United States of America. In spite of the economic problems, we're the most respected economy around the world. Many would trade for it. We've been caught up in a global slowdown. We can do much, much better. But we ought not to try to convince the American people that America is a country that's coming apart at the seams. I would hate to be running for president and think that the only way I could win would be to convince everybody how horrible things are. Yes, there are big problems, and yes, people are hurting. But I believe that this agenda for American renewal that I have is the answer to do it. And I believe we can get it done now, whereas we didn't in the past, because you're going to have a whole brand new bunch of people in the Congress that are going to have to listen to the same American people I'm listening to.
Mr. Perot, a minute response, sir.
Well, they've got a point. I don't have any experience in running up a $4 trillion debt. I don't have any experience in gridlock government where nobody takes responsibility for anything and everybody blames everybody else. I don't have any experience in creating the worst public school system in the industrialized world, the most violent, crime-ridden society in the industrialized world. But I do have a lot of experience in getting things done. So if we're at a point in history where we want to stop talking about it and do it, I've got a lot of experience in figuring out how to solve problems, making the solutions work, and then moving on to the next one. I've got a lot of experience in not taking 10 years to solve a 10-minute problem. So if it's time for action, I think I have experience that counts. if there's more time for gridlock and talk and finger pointing, I'm the wrong man.
President Bush, the question goes to you. You have 2 minutes, and the question is this. Are there important issues of character separating you from these other two men?
I think the American people should be the judge of that. I think character is a very important question. I said something the other day where I was accused of being like Joe McCarthy because I questioned, I put it this way, I think it's wrong to demonstrate against your own country or organize demonstrations against your own country in foreign soil. I just think it's wrong. That maybe they say, well, it's a youthful indiscretion. I was 19 or 20 flying off an aircraft carrier, and that shaped me to be Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. And I'm sorry, but demonstrating, it's not a question of patriotism, it's a question of character and judgment. They get on me, Bill's gotten on me about read my lips, and when I make a mistake, I'll admit it. But he has not admitted a mistake, and I just find it impossible to understand how an American can demonstrate against his own country in a foreign land, organizing demonstrations against it, when young men are held prisoner in Hanoi or kids out of the ghetto were drafted. Some say, well, you're a little old-fashioned. Maybe I am, but I just don't think that's right. Now, whether it's character or judgment, whatever it is, I have a big difference here on this issue. And so we'll just have to see how it plays out. But I couldn't do that. And I don't think most Americans could do that. And they all say, well, it's a long time ago. Well, let's admit it then. Say, I made a terrible mistake. How could you be Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and have some kid say, when you have to make a tough decision, as I did in Panama or in Kuwait, and then have some kid jump up and say, well, I'm not going to go. The Commander-in-Chief was organizing demonstrations halfway around the world during another era. So there are differences, but that's about the main area where I think we have a difference. I don't know about, we'll talk about that a little with Ross here in a bit.
Mr. Perot, you have 1 minute.
I think American people will make their own decisions on character. And at a time when we have work to do and we need action, I think they need to clearly understand the backgrounds of each person. I think the press can play a huge role in making sure that the backgrounds are clearly presented in an objective way. Then make a decision. Certainly anyone in the White House should have the character to be there. But I think it's very important to measure when and where things occurred. Did they occur when you were a young person in your formative years, or did they occur while you were a senior official in the federal government? When you're a senior official in the federal government spending billions of dollars of taxpayers' money, and you're a mature individual, and you make a mistake, then that was on our ticket. If you make it as a young man, time passes. So I would say just, look at all three of us, decide who you think will do the job, pick that person in November, because believe me, as I've said before, the party's over, and it's time for the cleanup crew. And we do have to have change, and people who never take responsibility for anything when it happens on their watch, and people who are in charge.
Your time
is up.
Time is up.
More later.
More.